I think you're going to hear a little overlap between what Terry said and what I said because it's the same person. That's the problem. But I'm so pleased to be here today to honor a writer whose work I hold so dear. I've had the privilege of working with Michael for over 10 years now, an opportunity that editors rarely get, and it means that I've gotten to know him incredibly well. And if you count our interactions back in college, we've known each other many more years. Back then, I was on the staff for the UNC undergraduate magazine, The Cellar Door, and Michael was, of course, already publishing stories. We accepted the stories of Michael's for publication, but when we published it, we changed the title without telling him. That's not usually the sort of detail I would remember. Actually, it's not a detail I did remember until Michael and I started talking many years later, and he reminded me, as if it had happened yesterday, of how he found his story inside the magazine with the new unapproved title of Just Facts. Michael, do you remember the original title?
It was called What I'm Opening Is Not For You. A highly appealing title.
I just knew he would know the original title. I'm just saying, What I'm Opening Is Not For You, and it was a better title. Anyway, I don't tell this story to convey how we didn't get off to a great start, but to say that as I learned that day, Michael forgets nothing and records experience and emotion with precision. You could read any of his novels or stories or essays, and whatever the subject matter, you will find that same precision in his characters and in the settings. Whether it's the student we come to sympathize with so much in his story, Hidden Meanings, and yes, that is an abbreviated title, not the full title, or the porch where she listens to the rain. And I just wanted to read just like 3 sentences from the story because I love them so much. I only know half of what I know, I guess. I went out in the sun and got burned bad, and then the skin peeled off. And can you blame me for not wanting to go outside anymore? She ought to go find her a big fat man. The only time my daddy'd get out of his chair nights was when a storm blew up out of the woods, which he liked to watch from the screen porch. The rain smelled rusty like the screen. I always loved that last sentence there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in 2005, Michael and I had reconnected after Shannon Ravenel had chosen one of his stories for New Stories from the South. At the time, I was editing but also acting as her assistant for the anthology, and he called me up to see if he could score some extra copies of the anthology for free. I relented, and in turn, he started sending me some of his previous books. Well, as an editor, it's not unusual of me to receive books from an author, and given the number of manuscripts I'm reading simultaneously, my outside reading time is sadly rather limited. So it was with some sense of reluctance that I received the pile of books that Michael handed me. But as you all know, to start a Michael Parker book is to realize that you've become enveloped by a world that you want to stay in. I started with Hello Down There, finished it in 2 days, and thought to myself, why had I never heard of this book before? It was amazing. And then I passed it off to someone else. After that, I read Towns Without Rivers, and I was completely absorbed by Rika and Randall. Then I went on to The Geographical Cure to discover how much he can do within the small space of a short story. And then it was around this time that Virginia Lovers, also retitled, right? That was supposed to be Virginia is for Lovers, was released. And it's a novel that speaks as much, if not more, to our world today as it did back in 2004. So soon after that, I was lucky enough to be able to buy Michael's next book for Algonquin. And I'm deeply proud to say that I've now worked with him on 3 novels, If You Want Me to Stay, a story ostensibly about 3 boys on the run, but it's also about what love can do to us and how it can undo us. The Watery Part of the World, in which an island with just 3 people contains a lifetime of experience and heartbreak. And then I started adding notes here, sorry, on the side, but because there's so much in this book, but it's also a novel which contains one of the most cogent portrayals of the tension between those in an indigenous culture and those who study it, or as they're called in the book, the tape recorders. It's the end all I have in this world, in which a car has witnessed years of broken stories and captures the desperation of loneliness, yet also affirms that we are never truly alone. And the collection Don't Make Me Stop Now, which I've now read again and again and again. Each of these novels and the stories are entirely different in setting, sensibility, rhythm, yet each asks the question, how much can we repair ourselves or others? And how do we ever learn to forgive ourselves or to change? It's a question I think that you cannot ask enough. I always try hard to edit from, like I try to say, and I'm taking the wording from another famous editor, from the inside out, trying to understand a writer's vision. I aim to be also their ideal reader, to find what's off and what will raise questions. Essentially, an editor is a teacher hoping to show writers where their novel makes a wrong turn or where it could use more development. But with Michael, I found from the very beginning that he was teaching me even more, to understand the deep connection between language and meaning, between syntax and emotion, between setting and mood. Michael writes novels that come from a deep emotional well, and he has been known to write one of them in 3 weeks. For the record, that was If You Want Me to Stay. But in all the time I worked with him, there was nothing unpremeditated about his approach to story or a storyline. And from that, I learned immensely. I learned to hold my other writers to his high standards. And I wished many times that I'd had the opportunity to be one of his students. And Terry, you tell me how much more that, I mean, it's great to hear the quotes from Keith Morris and others. Some of the advice he would toss off to me as if it was no big deal has been invaluable. He told me, for example, that you could usually fix a sentence of dialogue by cutting the first 3 lines, which tend to be filler. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've repeated this verbatim to my writers, or his profound understanding of the role of rhythm in writing, which in his books always goes hand in hand with the mindset of the character's emotional state. This, as you all know, especially as I hear about last night, goes out of his deep connection to music. And so I want to read to you an excerpt of an interview he gave a few years ago when he had already moved to Texas part-time. Anyway, because you'll see why I bring up the Texas thing, because I think he explains it best, as he always does. Music is such a part of my life, has always been, that it's really hard for me to think about my work as separate from music. I listen to music all the time. As I write this, I'm listening to an old Dinosaur Jr. album, and the first thing I did when I got out the duct tape to try to extract these bothersome cactus barbs was put on a record. How anyone could duct tape the cactus barbs out of their ankle without musical accompaniment is beyond me. But there are thousands of things I cannot do without music, including but not limited to cook, shower, fold clothes, rake leaves, grocery shop, pay bills, wrap presents. The list is endless. I grew up standing around the parking lots of laundromats, listening to 8-track tapes of Mott the Hoople and Led Zeppelin and the Stones through someone's busted backseat speakers. But I realized that you didn't have to grow up reading your way through the Western canon in order to be a writer. However, I cannot overestimate the importance of reading if you want to write, and I did eventually learn to read. I share these comments to convey what so intrigued me about Michael's work and the way he thinks from the start, both a rigorous approach to writing and a constant search for the same intense joy and sadness and looseness that's at the heart of all good music. Michael is many things at once, serious and funny, a teacher and one always trying to learn more, well attuned to the passion at the core of all of our actions and decisions, but equally intellectual about the choices he makes. There are just 2 more things I need to tell you about Michael. The first is that he is sly. He is the only writer I've ever worked with in my nearly 20 years as an editor who has sold me a book, and then, while I wait for the finished draft to show up, turns in a different book. Now that he's done this twice, I've learned to be a little more wary of that slightly hesitant voice on the phone, the one making a confession that I'll actually be receiving not the novel under contract, but this other one. How many other writers could get away with this? But the reason that he has gotten away with this twice, I should say twice, is that the substituted book is always gorgeous, heartbreaking, fully realized. It is always without question the book I want to publish. And I think that's because Michael, while he's kindly allowed me to edit his work, is always acting as his own editor as well, quietly putting away those manuscripts that he wasn't happy with and setting the bar higher for himself. And here's the last thing. I would be leaving out a huge chunk if I did not say that Michael is also a constant and loyal and devoted friend, one of my very closest. I don't say that just because he coached me through my first and second and third marathons, even yelling at other runners who dared to talk to me as I limped along, or because I now own, as I'm sure Terry does too, a pile of Michael's handcrafted mixed CDs. But because in the end he is more than just a writer of many fiercely intelligent books, he is steadfast. I can't say that about many people in this world, and for that I'm so grateful to him. Thank you, Michael.